She parked in front of my house at 4 in the afternoon. The car was wrong for this street. Too clean, too quiet. I knew it before she got out. I was on the porch replacing a broken board when she walked up. Dark coat, small leather bag, no assistant, no lawyer. She stopped at the bottom of the steps and looked straight at me. "My name is Grace Harlow," she said. "My father is Harold Harlow. He died 6 weeks ago. I found something in his safe that belongs to you." I set down the hammer. "What?" "Your report," she said, "from the Millbrook Commons site 6 years ago. My name is Nathan Cole. I'm 32 years old. I live alone on Cedar Street in Millbrook, Virginia. I replace broken boards, fix pipes, patch roofs for the neighbors. It pays enough. I don't need much more than that anymore. 6 years ago, I was a structural engineer at Harlow Construction, 26 years old, youngest safety supervisor on site. I believed back then that if you did your job right, the system protected you. I was wrong about that. On a Tuesday morning in March, I found diagonal cracks in 3 load-bearing columns at the Millbrook Commons apartment project. Not surface crazing, structural. I photographed every inch, measured the widths, wrote a 6-page report, and recommended a full stop work order until an independent engineer could assess the concrete mix. I sent the report through every channel I had, the project manager, the regional safety board, the company server, all of it. Nobody responded. 2 weeks later, a section of scaffolding on the same columns collapsed during a shift change. 2 workers were injured. The site shut down for 7 months. I expected the investigation to clear my name. My report had warned them. The report was gone. The copy on the company server had been deleted. The safety board said they never received the certified letter. The duplicate I kept at home vanished the same week someone broke in and took nothing else. Not my cash, not my tools, just that folder. The investigation named me as the engineer who had failed to identify clear warning signs. I was fired. My certification was suspended. Word went around the region quietly. Nobody would hire me for anything above basic labor. Sarah and I had been engaged 8 months. When I lost the job, we lost the insurance, the savings, the plan. She stayed 14 months. Then she got sick. We had no insurance by then. I worked every job I could find. It wasn't enough. She died in February. I don't blame Harold Harlow for her illness. But I will never pretend that losing everything at the exact moment she needed treatment most didn't make everything worse. Since then, I've lived in this house on Cedar Street. I go to work, I come home, I fix things for other people, and I stopped believing in fairness a long time ago. "What did you find?" I asked. "Your original report," Grace said. "The 6-page version, with your photographs, an independent structural assessment confirming the columns were compromised, and a memo my father wrote 3 days before the collapse." "What did the memo say?" "It told his people to keep the schedule, adjust the documentation later if necessary." I looked at her. "There's also a recording," she said. "Audio. My father on the phone with the project manager 4 days before the accident. He acknowledged your report. He said it had been handled." I sat down on the top step, not because I wanted to. My legs just stopped holding me. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because it's the truth. People with that much money don't drive to this neighborhood just to tell someone the truth." She didn't look away. "I want to release the documents publicly. Reopen the investigation. Clear your professional record." "What does the company get?" "Nothing good. Stock hits the floor. Half the board probably walks. I'll likely be removed as acting CEO." "Then why?" She looked at the steps for a second, then back at me. "Because if I keep running that company while sitting on this file, I'm doing the same thing he did, just with better timing." I didn't believe her. Not yet. "You can sit on that step," I said, "but you're not coming inside." She sat. She came back 3 times the following week. Always alone, always late afternoon. She parked a little farther down the street each time so the car wasn't right in front. She never brought contracts, never brought anything that looked like an offer. Just the small bag and a seat on the bottom step. The second visit she brought a copy of my original report. I recognized everything, every photograph, every measurement, even a small typo in the 3rd paragraph one hadn't thought about in years. I held the pages and the whole morning came back, sitting in the company truck on site, typing with cold fingers, knowing even then that nobody wanted to read what I had written. "Did you verify these?" I asked. "Forensic examiner, ink, paper, metadata, cross-referenced with city records. Everything matches." "Why did he keep it?" "I don't know," she said. "Maybe guilt, maybe insurance against the rest of the board." "Doesn't matter now," I said. "No," she said, "it doesn't." Word traveled on Cedar Street the way it always did. By the end of the week, 3 neighbors had stopped me to ask about the woman in the nice car. I told them the truth. She was trying to fix something her father had broken. Mr. Riaz came by the house on Friday evening with a plate of food his wife had made. He set it on the railing and looked at me. "So you're going to do it," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm still deciding." "That means yes." He looked out at the street. "The year you lost the job, you fixed my furnace, in January. I couldn't afford a real repair, and you did it anyway and told me the parts cost $12. They did cost $12. The labor didn't." He looked back at me. "You've been doing right by this street for 6 years. Somebody ought to do right by you." He went home before I could answer. I stood on the porch for a while after that. The street was quiet, a few lit windows. Same cracked asphalt it had been for 10 years. I had told myself this place was all I had left. I had been protecting it so carefully I hadn't noticed it had already become the whole of my life. Not just a house, a reason to stay small. Mr. Riaz at the corner market stopped me that Thursday when I went in for bread. He leaned across the counter. "I've seen this before," he said. "They show up in nice cars, apologize like they mean it. Then they hand you papers to sign and you end up with nothing." I told him she hadn't asked me to sign anything. He looked at me. "Not yet." I wasn't angry at him. I had the same thought every time her car turned onto the street. What kept me from telling her to stop coming wasn't her sincerity. Sincerity can be performed. What held me there were the details she knew without being told. She knew the exact date I had submitted the report. She knew the name of the city engineer who had asked for an independent review. She knew about the phone call the project manager made the day after I kept pushing, the one where he told me to stop sending emails. Those details had never been in any newspaper. On the 4th visit, I told her everything. I started with the morning I found the cracks and worked forward. I told her about the project manager refusing to show me the internal review, about the deleted files, about coming home to find the drawer opened, about the job interviews that went fine until the company called the next day to say they had reconsidered, about the places that told me straight out they didn't want trouble with Harlow. Then I told her about Sarah, not all of it. I didn't describe the night Sarah sat at the kitchen table trying to figure out how to tell her parents the wedding was off. I only said that when I lost the job, we lost everything that was supposed to come next, and that 14 months later, she was gone. Grace didn't say she was sorry. She didn't say her father hadn't meant for any of it to happen. She just sat on the step and listened until I finished. When I stopped, she said, "My father read your report. He knew what you had found. He still chose to keep building. I had believed that for 6 years. Hearing it said plainly by his daughter was different." "What do you want from me?" I asked. "I want to know what you want to happen," she said. "This is your story. I won't release anything unless you say yes." It was the first time she'd given the decision to me. 3 days later, a letter arrived from a collection agency. It said I owed $14,000 in administrative costs related to the Millbrook Commons investigation, 30 days to pay or they would place a lien on my house. I called Grace from the backyard. After I read it to her, she said, "That debt doesn't exist. My lawyers can have it withdrawn in a week." "No," I said. "Nathan, I won't fix this with Harlow money." My voice came out harder than I intended. "If you pay that bill, every time I look at this house, I'll know it was saved by money from the same place that took everything else from me. I can't live like that." She was quiet for a moment. "All right," she said. "I won't touch it unless you tell me to." Before the letter, I had been treating this whole thing as something I might consider. After it, I understood that someone inside Harlow Construction already knew we were meeting. They were using my house as a pressure point. I pulled back. I answered only what she asked. Kept the visit short. One afternoon I told her straight, You can lose the company and start over, I said. You have money, you have options. I have this house and whatever's left of my name. If this gets dug up and buried again, I lose the last thing I own. She didn't argue. I know the risks aren't equal for us, she said. That was the most honest thing anyone had said to me in 6 years, and it bothered me more than any promise would have. 2 days later, I called her and told her I was done. She drove over, stood at the bottom of the steps, didn't argue. I said I believed she genuinely wanted to fix it, but good intentions and the ability to actually fix something were two different things. I had already lost everything once by trusting the system. She nodded. I respect your decision. I watched her car pull away. That night the house was so quiet I could hear the clock in the living room. I had a box in the closet that had been in the same spot for 6 years. Sarah's things. A few photographs. The notebook she used to track her medication schedule during a bad flu the winter we were still together. I had never opened the notebook. I opened it that night. On the last used page, between 2 lists of dates and dosages, there were a few lines in her handwriting. Something she had written during one of the long waits in the clinic waiting room. Nathan still thinks he failed because he couldn't fix what happened, but the part that scares me isn't the accident. It's watching him start to believe that doing the right thing doesn't matter. I sat for a long time without moving. She hadn't asked me to keep fighting for her when she left. She had only been afraid that Harold Harlow's decision would turn me into someone who chose silence just to stay safe. I had spent 6 years telling myself I was protecting what little I had left. The truth was simpler and harder than that. I had let fear make every decision. If I stayed silent now, Harold Harlow would still win, and he was already dead. I picked up my phone and typed to Grace, "Don't leave yet. Please." 40 minutes later, her car came back up Cedar Street. I was still on the top step with a cold cup of coffee. She got out carrying a larger bag. She didn't ask why I had changed my mind. She came up the walk and sat on the bottom step like she had every other evening that week. "Show me everything," I said. "Don't hold anything back." She opened the bag. The first folder held the independent structural assessment done by a city engineer 14 days before the collapse. Every finding matched what I had warned about. The columns showed abnormal deterioration. The concrete mix hadn't met design specifications. The site should have been halted for a full structural review. The second folder held emails between Harold Harlow and the company's general counsel. They discussed which safety board members could be influenced, how to position me as the person responsible, which documents needed to disappear first. I read every page twice. Then Grace set a small speaker on the step between us. One of the files from the safe had audio, her father's voice. A call with the project manager 4 days before the accident. The project manager mentioned my report and said he was worried I had already sent it to the safety board. Harold Harlow said it had been handled. Keep the schedule. If anything goes wrong, record it as equipment failure. The safety engineer's report doesn't exist on official records. No one can cite it. The recording ended. I sat without moving. For 6 years there had been a part of me that kept circling back to the same doubt. Maybe the cracks weren't as serious as I thought. Maybe I had sent the report wrong somehow. Maybe if I had been more experienced, the collapse wouldn't have happened. The recording removed every one of those. Harold Harlow had heard the warning. He had known I was right. He had deliberately removed me from the record to protect the schedule and the money. He didn't just ignore it, I said. He chose me to carry it. Yes, she said. She didn't try to soften it. What happens to you if this goes public? The board suspends or removes me. The company fights back. The company lawyer uses everything available. Then why are you still here? She looked at me. Because if I stay quiet now that I know the truth, I'm not different from my father in the only way that matters. I didn't answer right away. That was the same thing I had just realized about myself. I need 3 days, I said. I went to work as usual during those 3 days. Fixed pipes, replaced a section of gutter on the house at the end of the block, listened to the recording every night. I also went to the cemetery. I sat in front of Sarah's section and told her everything even though I knew she wasn't going to answer. I said I was scared. Not of being called a liar again. I was used to that. I was scared of hoping and then being crushed a second time. But before I left, I understood one thing clearly. I couldn't spend the rest of my life protecting this house by living inside a lie. The morning of the third day, I went to the cemetery before I called Grace. I hadn't been in almost 2 years. I had told myself I was too busy. The truth was simpler. Going felt like admitting something was over. I sat on the grass beside the marker for a long time. I didn't say much. I told her about the recording, about the folder with the emails, about Grace sitting on the bottom step every evening without pushing. "I'm scared," I said out loud. Not of being called a liar again, of hoping and then being crushed a second time. I sat until the morning light moved. Then I stood up and drove home and made the call. On the morning of the third day, I called Grace. "We're going forward," I said, "but we do it my way." I didn't want a corporate statement written by a PR team. I wanted a press conference, every piece of evidence released at the same time, nothing that could be quietly walked back later. Grace agreed. She hired an independent media lawyer only to make sure we didn't accidentally violate any rule that could get the evidence thrown out. She promised the lawyer wouldn't write our statements. In the days before the conference, her phone kept ringing. One afternoon, I asked what was happening. "The board found out I have the documents," she said. "They've demanded I turn everything over. The company lawyer warned me I'll be removed as acting CEO before the conference even happens." "You don't have to destroy your life to fix mine," I said. She shook her head. "I'm not doing this only for you. I'm deciding what kind of person I'm going to be after inheriting everything my father built." I started seeing her differently after that. Not because a rich woman was coming to save me. I hated that idea, and she knew it. I saw a person choosing to give up the safest ground she had ever stood on because she refused to keep living on top of a lie. There was still no love between us, but for the first time I believed her completely. The press conference was at a downtown hotel. No Harlow Construction logo anywhere, no corporate colors, no company spokesperson, 12 reporters, 2 local television cameras, 3 investigative journalists on video. I arrived early, sat in the back row near the exit. I wore a dark blue shirt and a plain jacket. I didn't want to look like someone asking for sympathy. I wanted to look like an engineer who had done his job. Grace walked to the front without notes. She said her father had died, that she had found the East Vale file, the Millbrook Commons file, inside a hidden safe. She laid out my original report, the structural assessment, the chain of emails. Then she played the recording. When Harold Harlow's voice came through the speakers, the room went still. I watched the reporters writing faster. One turned to the person next to him with a look I had carried on my own face for 6 years. Grace didn't call what her father did a mistake. She said it plainly. Harold Harlow read the report. He understood the risk. He chose to bury it to protect the schedule and the company's money. Then she said my name. Nathan Cole did his job. He found the danger, documented it, and sent warnings through every channel available. His records were deliberately removed so that one person could carry the blame for people who held more power. A reporter asked if I wanted to speak. I stood up. The walk from the back to the front felt longer than it had any right to. I stood beside Grace and looked at the cameras. "I did my job," I said. "I found the problem, wrote the report, and sent warnings through every channel I had. What happened afterward was not my failure." I paused to keep my voice level. "I've carried a name that didn't belong to me for 6 years. I'm not here to ask for sympathy or revenge. I want the record to show what actually happened." Harlow Construction released a statement claiming the documents had been selectively presented. That same evening, the company lawyer appeared on local television. He kept saying people needed to understand the full context. The evidence had already been downloaded and shared. Within 48 hours, 3 independent audio experts confirmed the recording was authentic. 2 former Harlow employees contacted the press on their own. One had worked in records management and said she had been ordered to delete files related to my warnings. The other provided emails proving the safety board had received my certified letter and marked it as undeliverable. The story stopped being local. A state oversight committee reopened the Millbrook Commons investigation and opened reviews on 2 other Harlow projects. The company lawyer hired his own defense team. 2 board members resigned. Grace was suspended as acting CEO. I found out when I saw her name in the news. I called immediately. Are you all right? She was quiet for a second. I knew this would happen. Knowing doesn't make it easier. For the first time, she didn't try to sound strong. She said her entire life had been prepared for her to take over that company. Now the same people who had congratulated her were treating her like a traitor. You didn't betray the company, I said. You only refused to protect something that was wrong. You're the last person who should be comforting me right now. I'm not talking to the Harlow name, I said. I'm talking to Grace. After that call, the last distance between us began to change. After the certification letter came, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. I had the letter in one hand and my phone in the other, and I didn't do anything for about 20 minutes. 6 years ago, I had sat at this same table trying to figure out which bills to pay and which to defer. Sarah had been across from me with a notepad and a calculator, and neither of us had wanted to say what we were both thinking. The table looked the same, the house looked the same. I was not the same. I folded the certification letter and put it in the wooden box with Sarah's notebook. Not because it belonged there, because I wanted her to know. Then I called Grace. 6 weeks after the conference, my certification was officially restored. The letter said the previous suspension had been based on falsified records. The $14,000 debt was canceled. The lien request disappeared without me paying anything. A mid-sized construction company sent me a job offer. The director said they had read my original report. They wanted someone like me running safety on their projects. I read that sentence several times. 6 years earlier, one company had closed every door in front of me. Now the same report was opening them. I accepted the position as senior safety consultant. The first person I called was Grace. She was quiet for a few seconds. Then she said, "Sarah would have been very proud of you." I didn't ask how she knew the name. Maybe I had mentioned it. Maybe she had read it somewhere. What mattered was that she didn't say Sarah would be proud because I had won. She said she would be proud because I had gone back to work I once loved. 3 months after the conference, Grace formally resigned from Harlow Construction. She could have waited for the board to fire her and taken a large severance. She chose to leave on her own terms. In a short statement, she said she couldn't inherit what her father had built without also accepting responsibility for how he had built it. She used part of her own money to set up the Millbrook Commons Labor Fund for workers who had been injured, lost jobs, or faced retaliation for reporting safety problems on Harlow projects. She didn't name the fund after herself or her father. She told me over the phone that the building where it all started shouldn't be erased from memory just because it was connected to something shameful. After that, she started a small consulting firm, community development projects, independent safety oversight required on every contract, a clear channel for workers to report problems without fear. She called me one afternoon and asked if I would help design the safety procedures for their first project, a community center in Eastbrook, 3 kilometers from Cedar Street. I said no. I was afraid of falling back into a situation where I owed her something. Grace didn't argue. She put a standard employment contract on the table in front of me and said, "I'm not offering you help. I'm hiring a capable engineer. If the terms aren't fair, have a lawyer look at them." She had finally understood what I had been trying to say from the beginning. I didn't need to be saved. I needed to be treated fairly. I signed the contract. Working together was different from everything that had come before. We still argued. I thought she pushed the schedule too hard. She said I was too cautious because I always prepared for the worst outcome. One afternoon, we spent nearly an hour on whether she could switch material suppliers at the last minute. But unlike every boss I had worked for before, she always asked for my full explanation and then actually listened. If I could prove a decision created a safety risk, she stopped, even if it delayed the project or cost more money. One evening after we finished inspecting the site, she asked why I was still living on Cedar Street. The new job paid enough to move somewhere better. "It's the last place Sarah and I had together," I said. She looked at the site drawings in her hand. "You're not ready to leave yet, maybe. Or maybe you think leaving the house means leaving her behind." No one had ever said that to me before. I admitted that part of me was afraid if I changed too much, the memories would start to fade. Grace didn't tell me I had to move on. "The love you had for her isn't inside those walls," she said quietly. I didn't answer, but I thought about that sentence for the rest of the week. What I felt for Grace wasn't gratitude anymore, and it wasn't respect. It was simpler and harder than both of those. I loved that she had looked at her family's wrongdoing and not flinched. I loved that she never made promises she wasn't sure she could keep. I loved that she had been willing to lose an empire rather than live comfortably on top of a lie. But I didn't say any of it yet. I was afraid the feeling would be mistaken for dependence. The person who had been helped and the person who helped them. That's a hard thing to separate. I waited. Grace and I didn't talk about anything personal during the first month of the Eastbrook project. We talked about concrete and drainage and fire suppression systems and community center zoning requirements. We ate lunch on site in separate trucks most days. We drove to meetings in separate cars. It was professional and efficient and slightly strange because we had sat on opposite ends of a porch for months talking about things that mattered, and now we were behaving like people who had just met. One afternoon she asked me something about the load rating on a beam and then stopped mid-sentence. "Can I ask you something that has nothing to do with this project?" "Go ahead." "Do you miss it?" She was looking at the building frame. "Engineering, the real kind." "Every day," I said. "Then why did it take you 6 years to get back to it?" "Because I stopped thinking I had the right to." She didn't say anything. She wrote something on her clipboard. Then she said, "You had the right the whole time." It was a small thing to say. It landed like something much larger. I went back to my measurements, and she went back to hers, and neither of us said anything else about it that afternoon. But I thought about that sentence for the rest of the week. You had the right the whole time. 6 years of deciding I didn't. 6 years of making myself smaller so the loss wouldn't keep growing. And she said it in the same voice she used to talk about drainage gradients. Like it was just a fact. Like it had always been obvious to anyone paying attention. The day before the ceremony, I drove past the Millbrook Commons site. The apartment building was occupied now. Had been for years. Repaired, inspected, certified safe after the original stoppage. I had never gone to see it after everything. I sat in the truck across the street and looked at it for a while. People going in and out, a woman with a stroller, a teenager on a bike, a man carrying groceries, normal things. The building had been fixed. I had not. That had been the deal I made with myself: protect the building, sacrifice the engineer. Someone had to pay, and the company had decided it would be me. I thought about the 2 workers who had been injured in the collapse. I had looked them up years ago. Both had recovered. One had gone back to construction work. One had changed careers entirely. Their names were in my report. They had always been in my report. The report that Harold Harlow had put in a safe and left to his daughter to find. I didn't understand that decision, and I had stopped trying to. Some things people do don't make sense from the outside. Maybe from the inside they do. Maybe they don't. What I understood was simpler. The report had survived. The truth had been sitting in a safe for 6 years, waiting for someone willing to open it. Grace had opened it. I started the truck and drove home. The opening ceremony for the community center was on a clear morning in early April. No big stage, just local residents, a few reporters, and the workers who had built the place. I walked through the building one last time, checking the foundation, the exits, the fire alarm system, out of habit. Grace was standing outside the main doors, watching children from the neighborhood run into the new activity room. I walked over. "How many times have you checked it?" she asked. 4. "It's safe." "I know it is," she smiled. Then the smile faded a little. "So the work is done." "Some of it," I said. I looked at the building. "You can't give me back the 6 years. No one can bring Sarah back. I know that." Grace said nothing. "But you stopped making me carry your father's debt. That's enough to start from." She looked at me for a long time. I took a breath. "Our contract is finished. You're not my employer. I'm not someone you need to compensate. So I want to ask you something. As Nathan, not as the engineer from Millbrook Commons." She waited. "Would you have dinner with me tonight? No company, no investigation, no past. Just a meal." She looked surprised. "Are you sure?" I knew what she was really asking. She was afraid I was confusing gratitude with something else. I had been afraid of the same thing for months. "I'm not asking because you fixed my record," I said. "I'm asking because after everything that happened, I still want to know who you are when you're not fighting anyone." She looked at me. The tension she had carried since the day she first stood at the bottom of my steps was gone. "Then yes," she said, "I accept. I once thought justice would feel like winning. When my name was finally returned to me, I didn't feel like I had defeated anyone. I only felt that the ground under my feet had become level again. Harold Harlow had used his power to turn truth into a lie. Grace had used the power she inherited to expose it, even though it cost her everything that power had given her. And I had chosen between silence and speaking when I had almost nothing left to lose. None of us could rewrite what had happened. We could only make sure it didn't keep deciding who we became. Some debts can't be settled with money. They can only be repaid with truth, with responsibility, and with the willingness to lose something in order to do what is right. Grace understood that before I did. She parked her car in front of my house at 4 in the afternoon and told me the truth even when I didn't want to hear it, even when I told her to leave, even when it cost her the company her father had spent his life building. I sat on the top step and she sat on the bottom one, and we talked for a long time about things neither of us had been able to say to anyone else. That was where it started, on a broken-down porch on Cedar Street. Two people on opposite ends of the same wrong, finding that there was, after all, a place in the middle where the ground held.